It looks like I am live and in the presence of somebody who celebrated a birthday. We're not going to talk about which number it was, but not only a former
Everything
birthday
after
boy,
26 is a technicality.
well, technicality or not, I mean, the man commands flyers around
Look at that
here.
gorilla.
The
Gorilla
man
on the
writes
loose. Have you seen this?
books that we love. The man writes books that get translated into Russian. The key is I'm with a legendary author. And I say legendary.
Co-author.
Nah, we're not talking about this guy. We're talking about this guy. The reason I say legendary is because this is a man who can take the highbrow analysis of lowbrow topics. And I consider that legendary behavior right there. So, DX Ferris, are you dialing in from Akron, Ohio?
Tonight? I'm dialing from Akron, Ohio, the Rubber City. Whoa! You can't take your eyes off of it, and you can only see it here.
Was that a David Lee Roth reference right there?
Yeah, you don't even have to ask. You know that. But you're a good host, so you did. You're a pro.
Well, Van Halen and David Lee Roth factor into the book. Do we say Skrelnik? How do we say that at the top of the flyer?
Skrelnik.
Yeah. Your latest book, which is it edition 4 or 5 of the
It's the fourth edition. Fourth edition. Okay. The book has existed in one form or another since 2013, and now it's bigger and badder than ever.
So it gets the subtitle and titling of being 66 2/3. Is that in any way a reference to the Naked Gun 33 1/3?
That is not. It is if you break 66 2/3 down into digital form, it is 666 repeating forever.
Okay, so that is also not Scott Steiner math.
Not Scott Steiner math either. Now, well, I've got to say, like, I don't mean to commandeer your show. I got to say this and shut up. But you and I have known each other for, I did the math on it. It sounds wrong, but like 7 years.
That sounds correct.
That can't be right. I'm fried, obviously, but 7 years, and we have written a book together, which I think is pretty good. And this is the first time we've actually spoken face to face. And I appreciate that. It says so much about you and the kind of professional you are that we could just assemble an entire book out of email conversations without goofing around or getting on the phone or doing anything unnecessary. And it probably says something about me and my neuroses that I exist so much, not face to face. But it's good to talk to you. This is overdue. It's a long time coming. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate the many, many things you've done before we were even collaborators. And I appreciate the things you do. And here it is, long time coming. And all 13 of you get to see it.
It was this book that made me a big fan of yours. But what you just said about us not being in a room together, not talking face to face, at first I thought that was bonkers. And then I realized I interviewed Paul Myers. Paul Myers is the brother of Mike Myers from SNL, top journalist and host, wrote the book about John Candy, etc.
I did not know that.
Co-authored a book with this guy has like 5 names. Sometimes he's S.W. Loudon, sometimes he's Steve Loudon. And I think they've written 2 books together and never been in a room together.
It's possible. For a person of a certain caliber, it's possible.
So it's good enough for Mike Myers' brother. I think it's good enough for.
It's good enough for Gwyneth Paltrow's cousin, distant cousin.
Distant cousin. But we're here to talk because I like to talk with authors and people who actually do things that can intellectualize things that the average person might go, that's a dumb topic. And the band Slayer, which is the focus of this latest revised book, when you go through it as a pop culture person, you see lots of Van Halen in there. You see Miles Davis and Cypress Hill and Christianity and Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's not just about metal, to put it very nicely.
Yeah, this is my second book I've written about Slayer, and I think both of them, the first one is part of the 33 1/3 series from Continuum Press, or formerly Continuum, now Bloomsbury. And each one of those is about or inspired by like movie soundtracks. Each one of the 33 and a third books is about a different classic album, from the Beach Boys to the Beastie Boys, and now they're catching up with a lot of more current artists.
Yes.
And my goal for that one, it was the first real full-on metal book in that series, and I'm getting to your point here. My point for that was to write a book that was something that would hopefully land with both people that listen to NPR and have never lost a shoe in the mosh pit, and people that have.
Right.
And beyond that, it was because it was that kind of audience, because those books were about people that care about culture and history and rock and roll, on theoretical and cultural levels. I wanted to place exactly where Slayer existed in the continuum of popular culture, American popular culture,
Right.
or really music. The first book was more about music, and this one, I think, goes a little bit further into where Slayer fit in American culture. So that is what I have tried to do.
And have successfully done that. And there's a lot of ties to Long Island, whether or not everyday people are thinking about that within Slayer. And one of the more prominent tie-ins is their producer and former label head, Rick Rubin, is a native of Long Island, a couple of towns over from here. And
yes.
I like that your updated version has the Rick Rubin watch, and it tracks how Rick has come in and out of favor with Slayer a number of times. Now, in following your work, and I promise there's a question here, DX.
No, we're here to talk.
Okay. The question is, you and I would never dispute the track record that Rick Rubin has.
No, absolutely.
Great.
I consider I'll keep it short. I consider myself having a PhD in Donnie Iris. My master's degree is in Slayer, and my undergraduate degree is in Rick Rubinology. I'm fascinated by the guy endlessly.
So in your, to simplify this initial part of the question, is Rick Rubin a good thing for Slayer?
He is. I mean, Rick Rubin. Part of what I do in the book is I try to quantify I try to quantify careers that resist quantification. Mm-hmm. But I looked at Slayer's career. I looked at Rick Rubin's career. The last time I did the math, Rick Rubin had worked with something like 10%, give or take, of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. Phil Spector is something like 5.
Yeah.
And nobody comes close to what Rick Rubin does. But at the time that he started working with Slayer, he was some weird New York long-haired dude in a leather jacket that works with rap artists, which mm-hmm. was inconceivable at the time for most of the world. And I'm, of course, just voicing the stereotype. It was very conceivable.
Right.
So when Rick Rubin really made his bones with the Beastie Boys' License to Ill, his first rock record, his first step into the larger world of working with Johnny Cash, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Metallica, Dixie Chicks, Shakira, his first step in that direction was working with Slayer. And he made the record Rain in Blood that is still their signature album. They were not always that intimately linked over the years, though he was with them until almost the very end of their continuous career.
Right. And to rudely interrupt and insert something right there, I don't think that the average person realizes that that's Kerry King from Slayer on Beastie Boys recordings.
Yeah. Every now and then somebody on the internet will turn it up and say, look, it's Kerry King from Slayer. Well, yeah, 40 years ago, yes, that was. Thanks for catching up.
But he's on, is it No Sleep Till Brooklyn?
Yeah, he plays on No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which is not an insignificant thing. You know, I note in the book that at the climax of director James Gunn's third Guardians of the Galaxy movie for Marvel, at the action climax of that movie, they're playing No Sleep Till Brooklyn. And specifically when Rocket Raccoon is cutting loose and kicking butt and taking names and shooting with a size-appropriate machine gun, Kerry King's guitar solo is playing on that song. So James Gunn, who is one of the great directors using popular culture and music references in his movies, selected that moment of the Beastie Boys Kerry King collaboration. And that, of course, is because of Rick Rubin.
That is because of Rick Rubin. Now, before we come back to the book, a point of curiosity I have, and Van Halen opened up this conversation, and Van Halen is throughout your book because we learn that Kerry King saw Van Halen a lot of times, and we learn about Alex Van Halen, how he ranked in drum polls with comparison to Dave Lombardo and other drummers in Slayer, etc. But in hosting a podcast that is focused on David Lee Roth and writing a book about David Lee Roth, to put it nicely, I'm persona non grata with relation to David Lee Roth and Van Halen as a whole.
It means you're probably doing it right. Not probably. You are doing it right.
Well, that is a fan base where they don't appreciate people trying to learn the truth and document the history. What I'm curious, as a podcaster about Slayer and an author of 2 books, one of them having multiple editions, do you get any feedback from anyone related to Slayer?
Not directly. I know they're aware of the book, and you know, I'm not connected to any of them. I'm not friendly of them. I don't have a cell phone for any of them, but I know for a fact that they know about the book via a few people. And I haven't heard anything bad from them. Yeah, they have their perspective, and they see some of the anecdotes and some of the witnesses' stories as a little bit skewed or incorrect, but they're not wrong. I'm not making this stuff up.
Right.
So yeah, they're aware of the book, but they don't call me to talk about it either. Does that answer your question?
It entirely answers your question. In my case, I've heard negative things that are then denied that they even know what it is that's going on. In other words, we know about it, but we're not acknowledging that we know about it. It sounds like a mutual path that we both have. Yet I think that if you were writing a book about the Dixie Chicks, they'd go, "Oh, thank you very much," and you'd get a holiday card.
Yeah, some people are like that, but you know, Slayer are unusual people, which is part of the whole reason you need to write a book or 2 or several about them. The author Joel McIver has a very good biography of theirs, and people say, "Well, should I read yours or his?" And my answer is yes.
Yeah, both.
Because in the words of the immortal David Lee Roth, in addition to, not instead of, which has become one of my central ethoses in life. Any serious topic needs more than one book, a lot more than one book. And Slayer, for the little that we know about them, are complicated guys. You know, you have to really read the tea leaves with them. I forget which author offhand. I'll try to find it here quickly because I try to cite authors when I can, as you know, haven't seen the book.
Right. Which as a reminder, is available in Russian.
And Czech also, but the Russian one's easier to find.
Yeah.
Metal Hammer writer John Duke wrote around 1990, give or take. He wrote, quote, "Slayer are perhaps the most enigmatic and opaque of all thrash bands," end quote. The most enigmatic and opaque. So some things about them and their personalities are glaringly obvious, and some are hopelessly obscure. And it's fascinating to me and other people. You know, there's some things we just cannot know, but I tell you what we do know.
So one of the things I really appreciated in your book was your analysis of Anthrax as being the fun thrash band of the big 4. Anthrax, to time with the local things, I believe they recorded an album here in Freeport, New York, the same studio where Public Enemy recorded a lot of their stuff. But the everyday person may not think of Anthrax as the fun thrash band, but when you say it, it entirely makes sense. But
yeah, they're the most enjoyable, bouncy. I mean, you can go nuts to them. There's not an inherent darkness in Anthrax. I'm not saying they don't get dark. I'm not saying they don't address bloody, serious topics. But you put on an Anthrax album and you're going to have a good time in a way that is different from Slayer. is different from Metallica, is different than Megadeth. Part of what I do in chapter, I think 41 or 43, is I put together a sustained contrast of all four bands. Can you compare those four bands' careers? Well, yeah. How many Grammys have they had? How many platinum albums? How many different members have they had? How many game-changing? I made up some of these metrics, but for my money, how many game-changing, kick-ass, classic side one, song one cuts do they have? And I think Slayer has the most, but I'm biased. And I look at them in their superlatives. They each have something that they are the most of. Metallica, biggest metal band ever, one of the biggest bands on the planet. Slayer's the thrashiest, I believe. Anthrax is the most fun, and Megadeth is the most technical. If you are a guitarist and an obsessive musician, you might like Megadeth and Dave Mustaine a little bit more than Metallica.
And when you think about it, all these bands are very intertwined with one another. When we found out that the drummer John, is it Dete? I never knew how to say his last name. Yeah,
Eddie, I believe. But it's been a long day. I could be wrong.
He played with both Slayer
it's
and
in
Anthrax.
The book.
And Kerry King was in an early incarnation of Megadeth.
Yes.
Can we say that?
Yeah, Kerry King played the first live shows with Dave Mustaine. He came up idolizing Dave Mustaine. He thought he was the best part of Metallica. Just idolized the guy. And Kerry King is not a guy that will say positive things about somebody lightly. So he had an opportunity to play with Dave Mustaine's new band when he got kicked out of Metallica way back east in the tri-state area, as you know. So many things about thrash actually happened on the West Coast in New York and Jersey. He thought it would be a great learning opportunity. And as we say in the book, what he learned about that was, I asked him, what did you learn from Dave Mustaine? And he says, I learned I didn't want to be in a band with Dave Mustaine.
Well, Dave Mustaine breaks a lot of principles for me. And I'm going to make this about you and in a good way. A lot of your writing is it's not just looking at lowbrow things in a highbrow way, but a lot of the time it's looking at things that seem evil on the surface, but there's a good person or a good concept behind that. And so your Slayer book talks about Tom Araya's Christian upbringing or Catholic upbringing, however you want to correctly name it, as a Jewish person who is very ignorant right here. But
yeah, primarily Catholic, but a charismatic extreme branch of Catholicism.
Sure.
That's a whole other topic.
So that's a guy with that religious upbringing, but then he's singing the vocals for the songs on the album called God Hates Us All, which is contradictory. And that's almost like professional wrestling, where you find out that the bad guys in real life are generally the nice people, the nice, relaxed, smiley people. Your book about Goodfellas, which I'll hold up, you're looking for all the good advice and the good that could be found in there. Where that ties in is Dave Mustaine might be the only person where I don't think that the bad guy in real life is the good guy.
That's another astute observation on your part. I think you're spot on there. I think what you see with Dave Mustaine is what you get.
Yeah. I interviewed him one time, and I think he just had a dental appointment, and I don't, people say don't say things that you can't prove. No, I have the proof. I was told he's late from the dentist, and he was a little out of it, and maybe he got some of the sweet gas or something like that. He was confusing themes and confusing topics, but he wasn't nice, which was surprising because I've heard other interviews and experiences of him being nice or relaxed or family guy. Maybe I just had one bad day in the life of Mustaine. Of the many interviews you have done, have you done any Mustaine interviews?
Yeah, I've talked to him a couple times, and Dave Mustaine is, and what I think, don't send me email saying you're ripping on Dave Mustaine and why are you doing it?
Love his music, forever love his music, love everything he's accomplished professionally. Just putting that out there.
My opinion about Dave Mustaine is inconsequential. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to tear him down, but Dave Mustaine is the kind of guy that you have a lot of difficulty getting him to talk about anything other than Dave Mustaine. And I tried like hell to get him in this book in a couple different ways. I have some original quotes that have never appeared from other interviews from him. But, one time I was interviewing him about his career. It was some years back. And it seems to me that he was one of the only guys on the thrash scene in LA. He was a couple years older and smarter and more accomplished. And it seemed to me that he's one of the only guys in the thrash scene that had picked up a book ever. And
definitely a well-read guy. Yeah.
And I thought that must have been lonely. I wanted to ask him, like, what was that like to be like so much smarter than the rest of these guys? And I could not get him to stop talking about himself for long enough to ask him a leading question about himself. I thought I had like a better angle for him to talk about himself in a way that was different and elevated. And I couldn't even get in that question because Dave's all about Dave, and it works for him. I think his band was better when it had creative input from other people.
Sure.
But hey,
that makes sense. So I didn't have the greatest experience with interviewing him, which I don't know. Love his music, but the opposite end of that was when I was a very young interviewer interviewing Tom Araya. What shocked me was he's nothing like the guy on stage, nothing like the guy on the record. This is a relaxed, smiley human being. And your book talks about that, about how if he does have a tantrum or he does flip out, he forgets about it 3 minutes later. But more importantly, he was voted class clown in high school.
Yeah, he's I think I say it a couple times. He's a guy with pearly whites. He's got a great smile. He's happy. He enjoys himself. And he talks about how that's important to himself, that he smiles and he doesn't let anybody take that smile away from him.
Yeah. So putting that all together, did you have an awakening to start loving the history of Slayer and not just going, I like this song?
No, Slayer is one of the things that has held my attention consistently over my life. I discovered them in 7th or 8th grade. And I mean, that was 1985, Hell Awaits era. Since then, I have not sat down with a pen or some sort of writing implement in my hand and not drawn a pentagram or 10. And just Slayer, even in the 90s when I was not listening to a great deal of metal, I was listening to a lot of, I think the 90s were great for music that was heavy but not metal. Slayer always held my attention, even when I wasn't listening to Metallica anymore. They crushed me. They disappointed me. Metallica lost my interest. Anthrax stayed good. But I was always keenly interested in Slayer. When I was working on the first version of this book, I was looking for a quote that is commonly attributed to Voltaire. It's not from him, but it's commonly attributed to Voltaire. The quote says, "Humankind will not be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest."
Wow.
Or maybe it's backward, but people that are familiar with that kind of thing will recognize that quote.
Sure.
And in the book, I do clarify on the provenance of that. I had that in the back of my head, but I knew it from a world lit class. So I had to go back digging through my college notebooks because the professor that I got it from really meant something to me. And I wanted to have every word he ever said on the record. So I went back and I'm looking through my college notebooks, and I was not a big metal guy in college, but I found like page after page of Slayer album rankings and songs and lyrics and pentagrams. So no matter what I've been doing in my life, Slayer has continued to speak to me. And I have theories as to why, but I just like them. And they've held on to my attention in ways that most things have not. And they've never disappointed me in the way that a lot of my favorite God tier level bands have.
So is Slayer the longest term appreciation you've had for a musical artist consistently?
Yeah, it's been continuous. I've never stopped liking Slayer. I mean, as you know, I'm open about my pop culture enthusiasms. I mean, I thought it was cool that you found it so unusual when I wrote the Goodfellas book that I referenced professional wrestling openly. Because once I like something, I like it, and I don't care. I'm going to tell you about that. But I can't think of anything else that's been consistent. Batman, probably, but I haven't written a book about Batman. I haven't written 2 books about Batman. I would love to put a couple fingerprints on Batman one day. But
well, in terms of the admitting you like wrestling, something harkens back to sometimes you get advice and it takes you decades later that you realize that was terrible advice. I never, ever should have considered that or listened to that. And this came after a concert. I was hanging out around one of my favorite bands called Super Drag, who I still am into, and I saw some of their reunion shows. But this guy was an editor of Blender magazine. Do you remember Blender?
Yeah, very much. I have a great quote in here from Blender, but we'll set that aside for a moment. I very much remember that. Rob Tannenbaum was one of the editors, I believe.
Yes, this did not come from Rob Tannenbaum, who was from Rolling Stone and all that. This particular writer was trying to give me life advice. I was 19 or 20 years old, and he was trying to tell me to dumb down my pop culture references for when women were around if I was trying to impress women. And I think his quote was like, "Save the Sherwood Schwartz for when the guys are around." Like, in other words,
excuse me. I'm sorry for people that had to listen to that.
But Sherwood Schwartz is the creator of Gilligan's Island and Brady Bunch, and he was telling me to dumb it down. So for a lot of years, I was thinking, know your audience and don't advertise the obscure things you're into and keep quiet. And now as a librarian and an investigator at this point in my life who tapes interviews, you go, no, stop trying to please everybody. Just be yourself. That comes across better than a harnessed version of yourself.
Absolutely.
Generally speaking.
Absolutely. That's, I mean, I'm the father of 2 daughters, and I tell them that you have to find people that are into what you're into, and that's going to make everything go so much better. If you love metal and they don't, and you love going to concerts and they don't, or if you love going to ballet and they don't, if you're into the same kind of things, everything else is going to fall into place. But if you're not, don't try to make it happen. Don't feel like I need this person, even though it's no fun and we're miserable all the time.
Right. So going back a couple of conversation topics, I find that when I talk about David Lee Roth, no matter how many records Van Halen sold, and Van Halen's playing on a classic rock radio station right now, to a lot of people, they just don't have that David Lee Roth gene. It never appealed to them. That's just weird stuff. In your case, do you have a community of people that love Slayer? Are they mostly online? Are they there in Ohio?
I do. I'm obviously a little bit fried right now. I told you before we started, like
it was your birthday yesterday. You're allowed to be fried.
Yeah, it was my birthday, and I've like last week I do. I'm in a business where we're on call all the time, so we get overnight calls. So last week felt like one big week, and I couldn't tell you the last day that I've not worked because, spoiler, there's not a lot of money in books and cartoons and such in 2025. So a lot of the work that I do is as a side hustle, and I'm always working on something. So I made a very conscious decision to come at you sweaty right off of the exercise bike instead of trying to get a nap after work and coming to you a little bit groggy.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. But what we're talking about here is the community.
Yeah, so the community. So part of the reason that I'm so frazzled is this phase of the Slayer book, this 4th edition, the podcast, the audiobook version of it, which has been in the works for a long time. It all started as like a 1-year project in 2022. Mm-hmm. And it's no, it's 2023, and now 2025 is almost over.
Yeah.
And I only recently got the book out. I'm still not done with the audiobook, which I thought was done well over a year ago. So it has become one thing after another. And when I say that, I mean, like, I started a podcast about Slayer in 2023 after the band was done, and they were never going to get back together, and they were going to be the one band, the one entertainment entity in history that retired and stayed retired. You know, as wrestling fans, we know what it's like when someone says they're going to retire. It's their
Final match.
farewell tour.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, Terry Funk never wrestled again. Whatever, guys.
He wrestled for another 20 years after his last match. And Kiss.
Yeah, Kiss. I was going to say Kiss.
And now Twisted Sister, they're back after telling everyone that they were fake for doing these reunion tours. And Motley Crue did its reunion tour, and we're back within 5 years. And
yeah, exactly. So Slayer was going to be the one band ever that didn't do that. So the dust had settled. They retired a few years ago, and I started what was going to be an audio. I launched a podcast called Talkin' Slayer, which, if you know Slayer, there's a phrase, something Slayer, fudgin' Slayer, fudgin'. And I was just going to read the book, like a chapter or two every week. You know, I was going to have like a nice short-lived podcast with a finite lifespan on it instead of going forever. Just a year. Going to talk some Slayer every week, read to you, and then when it's all done, I'm going to condense it into an audio book, and it'll be done, and then no more Slayer in my life. I can move on.
Yeah.
So right when I was just about done with that first year, and after I had put out a third edition of the book, and I was just getting ready to settle down and start working on that audio book, Slayer got back together. And that was spring 2024. And that set off this big chain reaction of Slayer this and Slayer that, and we wound up with a much bigger book. But in launching that podcast, to answer your question, I finally put together the community of Slayer fans that I've been looking for. I mean, my first Slayer book appeared in 2008. And I've met all sorts of great fans over the years and had conversations with people, but only now with, you know, the podcast and with the book, I feel like I'm really getting a community. I'm selling books via a very cool company called, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, the Aj Offensive. It's spelled ANJA, so it's not like it sounds. And these people, they're the kind of people that'll read a book about Aleister Crowley or modern occultism and make the connections between Slayer and Metallica and occult and Cthulhu. So it's, after all these years, it's finally coming together. You know, it's tough because to a lot of people, the mere act of listening to Slayer says things they can't say. You know, I'm sure music is like that for all people, but to some people, like, they can't put feelings into words. And Slayer says the world is this and the world is that. And they say, yeah, that's right. My rhetorical message is I listen to Slayer, and whatever Slayer says, I'm co-signing on that. So some people are like that. And I understand and respect that. You know, I'm a fan of a lot of things that I cannot articulate. But I've met a lot of really cool people, and, you know, a lot of them started off as fans from the podcast and said things that were so insightful and so pithy and so colorful. They wound up in the later edition of the book like, wow, that's good. I'm going to quote you on that. We have a guy named Jay Levitz that grew up around the community of the Slip Disc record store. That
Slip Disc here on Long Island.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was a big fan back in the day. He was witness to like the Slayer infamous signing that, you know, in legend led to a lot of property damage. The final show at the Rio Theater.
Oh, wow. You know your stuff there. Yeah, the Rio. Most Long Islanders do not know that venue that you just mentioned, the Rio. I don't think it lasted more than a year. Yeah,
I mean, the Slayer show was the last show at it, and not for nothing, as they say in Jersey.
Yeah.
And we tell that story in there. So, you know, guys like that, Jay Levitz, a big supporter of the show, David Jones, is a nurse. He's a high-level medical nurse. And he was able to read, you know, a lot of the research that I had done on Jeff Hanneman and his career-ending injury and what led to it dovetailed with some health complications. And he was able to say, you know, speaking as a nurse, let me tell you this and I'll tell you that. And he was able to give me perspective on it that I didn't. So a lot of these people that started as listeners of the podcast actually became part of the book. And it's just a pleasure to get to talk to people. You know, some people have technical insights into the terrible, horrible infection called necrotizing fasciitis, and some people just like Slayer, and I'm happy to talk about that too. Frickin' Slayer, man. Only I don't mean frickin'.
So to further generalize and tie it in with what we talked about before, where you write about topics that aren't just what they appear, they're more complex than what they appear. My experience, every Slayer diehard that I know is very well read. They channel their energy and their rage appropriately, and it's the opposite of the music. And every Van Halen diehard I know is just very angry, and they don't party. In other words, I find so much drama within the Van Halen fan base that never ends. For example, and this is going to tie back to you here. Who's the better lead singer? Is it Roth or Hagar? Oh, Sammy couldn't do this, so Dave could do that. There's that drama. There's why did people get kicked out of the band? Which era is the best of the band? There's all that anger. And I don't find that with Slayer, even though Dave Lombardo was in and out of the band 3 times or so, and there was the revolving door lineup, I don't find that people go, you only listen to this era of Slayer, you're a loser. I don't see that infighting. Am I wrong about that?
No, and some people are very opinionated on it. And I mean, with Metallica, some people, I work with a guy who's 25 and he has like a really good Metallica tattoo that incorporates elements from the first 4 Metallica albums. And his dad is my age, so it's weird to have that kind of connection. And when I told him that there are people out there that consider Ride the Lightning like a weak album that was a sellout, he couldn't believe that. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, no, seriously, dude. Like the people that were there for the first album, a lot of them don't like the second one because it's got a ballad on it.
Yeah.
And I won't even mention And Justice for All to them. So, yes, some people don't like things. There are a lot of people that draw a line at Slayer. I mean, it's a huge question. For my money, Dave Lombardo, the band's original drummer, and I forget the exact count, but he's their 1st and 3rd and 5th and 7th drummer, something like that. Dave Lombardo.
He's like the John Frusciante of Slayer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He's the best drummer in metal for my money, for what I like, for what I value. I'm not a technical drummer. I'm not a musician. So Mike Portnoy is not high up on my list. All respect. So fans want to know, people want to know. I wanted to know, why isn't Dave Lombardo the greatest metal drummer in the greatest metal band? And that's what the book answers at length. Some people just will not accept the band without Dave. Some of them won't go see the reunion shows, won't even consider it. And I get that, because it's a good question. Why isn't this guy who did such great work with Slayer and other people, a guy that impressed Miles Davis with his drumming?
Yeah.
Why isn't he with this band? Well, it's a long story. It's in the book.
It's a long story. It's in the book. So there is some of that infighting, it sounds like, and I'm just
a little bit, but
it's not compared to Van Halen or Kiss.
Yeah, nothing compared to that. When I hear you on podcasts and when you stop by the Van Halen news desk and such, I don't envy. I think what you do with David Lee Roth is monumental, as we've talked about. It's important that people chronicle this man. And nobody has done it to the degree that you have, and from the perspective.
I think Greg Renoff has done a lot more than I have personally, but I think that you and I come from the same place of going, entertainment is more than entertainment. The average person just goes, I like this song. I'd like to hear that song again. That's a song. And then you or I go, I like that song. Who wrote it? Who produced it? Who actually played on it?
Yeah. Why is there this song, I'll Wait, in the middle of 1984 that sounds like nothing before or since? There's a good story to that. And most people are content to go, I like that song.
I like that song, and not, oh, the people who worked on this, what else did they do? So I can consume that and learn everything I can. In other words, to us, entertainment is not just a way to pass the time. Entertainment is actually part of the learning process. Were you like that when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I mean, like Ted Templeman is the first name that I remember seeing as a producer. You know, it was just years later we were talking about Van Halen and somebody said producer and I said Ted Templeman. And I was maybe 13 at the time. Like I didn't know what a producer did, but I knew
Yeah.
that the producer on the Van Halen records was Ted Templeman. Yeah, and I've always been like that. I want to know more. My wife does not, so she gets tired of my podcasts when we're driving around in the car, and I try not to burden her with it that much. But yeah, I want to know more. I got to know, like, why is there that one song that is like this and there's nothing else like it? Well, why did they leave? That Rick Rubin guy, what can we learn about him? We can learn so much. You know, for me, watching great athletes, great performers, great movies, you can discern and divine what life is about and how it works, um, by studying art and the circumstances that produce it.
Right. So this expanded edition does cover the post reunion version of Slayer, but more gigs and more activity keep getting announced, like the Hershey, Pennsylvania gig that they did. So theoretically, could there be yet another edition in a year or so of your book?
Yeah. I mean, the book exists in the fourth edition exists in four forms. Like this current updated one, there are four versions of it. And
Yeah.
the longest one is 639 pages. Now, you know, I'm not going to stop that short of 666. So in the future, there will be other things, but yeah, not so soon that you shouldn't buy this version of it. But yeah, there will be updates. Like Gary Holt just dropped a biography, and part of what one of the chapters in this Slayer book is it's a book review or a book report, a
Mhm.
report, not a review, of a book by Tom Araya, the singer, his sister, who's led a very interesting life. Um, Gary Holt's book was just coming out. I didn't want to steal his thunder. I want him to sell as many copies as possible. So I don't want somebody to feel like they read that chapter in my book. So now they don't need to read his book. But at some point, that'll be in there. I just did a big hour-long podcast episode that was a show report from that Hershey show that you mentioned, where
Mhm.
Slayer held essentially a mini fest that had the Cavalera conspiracy, knocked loose, suicidal tendencies, Power Trip, a lot of cool bands, and it felt, or Exodus was there too. It felt like a very special day in metal. Like it wasn't just a festival, it wasn't just six bands playing. It really felt like it was something. So that'll be in the book eventually, and God forbid, I hope Slayer outlive me. You know, I hope they live to be 140. But you know, like we can see now, Jeff Hanneman is gone. You know, I
Yes.
talked to him a few times, and we can't talk to him anymore. Yeah, and that's why these things matter. You know, Kerry King will not be here forever. Tom Araya will not. There will be a day when all we have is the music, and there are no more gigs, and there are no more this, and there are no more that. So that's one of the reasons I think what you do is important. You know, let's take a serious, like, critical look at David Lee Roth, not a negative way, but let's look at what made him great and what are the forces around him and why doesn't he do this and why doesn't he do that? You know, let's keep on the story as it develops. So yeah, there will be another edition eventually. I think I'm starting to get ideas for a third Slayer book, just a different kind of thing. There'll be more Slayer out there, more to come.
So the key is it's not a dead topic the way that, say, David Lee Roth might be a dead topic in terms of putting out very little, not doing any interviews, etc. In the case of Slayer, not only do you have four members plus former members plus estates plus new activity.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot out there. I mean, you know, if you know the book Wonder Boys, or the movie of it, where what's his face? Spartacus, the actor.
Mm-hmm.
The main character in Wonder Boys is writing a book that's something like 1,600 pages, and it's just getting longer and longer. It might be 3,000. There is a very close, very near alternate reality or timeline in which my Slayer manuscript is 2,000 pages, and it's only getting longer. And every single thing I add to it takes it further away from being finished, not closer to it. So
Yeah.
I could go forever.
Well, to bring a Van Halen parallel of sorts, there's very little that you can find about Van Halen in certain year spans, like 98 to like 2004. There's very little about Van Halen aside from solo member activity. And then there's very little about Eddie Van Halen from the last 5 years of his life after the last show in 2015 to when he died in 2020. And obviously, he was getting medical treatment, but we know very little about Alex Van Halen. The guy wrote a book about his life that was mostly paraphrased.
Somebody wrote a book about his life.
Yes, paraphrased from other. Most of Alex Van Halen's book was paraphrased from other people.
Yeah. And I got to go on the record. You mentioned him, Greg Renoff's book, Van Halen Rising. Like, for me, that is the gold standard of rock and roll books. And if for some reason you are a Van Halen fan, and you don't have that, what's wrong, man? Treat yourself.
So the amen, and where I'm going with all that is once Eddie Van Halen passed away in October 2020, and every person who ever knew him or was a fan of him that was being interviewed was asked questions about it, they started telling anecdotes. And before you knew it, we learned more about Eddie Van Halen, arguably in the last 5 years, and more about Van Halen from that and stuff being leaked to YouTube from the late 70s and 80s. You know, it took 40 plus years to come out. And suddenly we know more in the last 5 years than we did really for 25, 30 years before that. In the case of Slayer, do you feel there's a lot in the archives, a lot still to be learned?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that we simply cannot know until they decide to talk, and they're not talkative guys. So there are things that, like, I sketched out the best I could, and I, as a researcher, part of what you're doing if you're being disciplined and following an academic model is you have to acknowledge your shortcomings. Like, I don't look at this, here's that. I don't address this. We don't know this. It would be interesting to know that. So there are things that we don't know about Slayer. They really exist behind these huge privacy fences. Jeff Hanneman was not a public figure, the late, great Jeff Hanneman, the guy that, part of what I do in the book is, I didn't do it because of this, but it sort of dovetails in with it. People read the earlier versions of the book and they said, well, that's just his opinion and he thinks that, and that's just what he thinks. Well, everything you've ever read is just what somebody thinks, but you don't read a lot, so that's news to you. So people that were Slayer fans that didn't read much kept saying, well, that's just what he thinks. So I took a couple, not so, but incidentally, like I took 3 fan surveys and asked people, what's your favorite song? What's your favorite album? Who's your favorite member of the band? Who do you think is the MVP, most valuable player? Just because I wanted to know, not so much to counterbalance my opinions, but it very much does that. I can say Jeff Hanneman was my favorite guy in the band, but I also took a poll and 60% of respondents said that Jeff Hanneman was their favorite guy in the band. And 20% said, Dave Lombardo, the drummer, and something like another, I'm doing the math here, 60, 20, something like 15% said Tom, the singer, and then 5, Kerry King, who's the King captain or the team captain. So we try to be like, I tried to balance out my opinions and just present like, what do Slayer fans think? It's not just me. I'm not just the only one saying this. Late great Jeff Hanneman, he's gone. We can't talk to him anymore, just like Eddie Van Halen.
Just like Ace Frehley.
Yeah.
Our heroes are going. So it's important to document these things while you still can, which is a big part of what you're doing. So this book, maybe eventually we get a new updated version of it? What's going on with the comics? Where should we be looking for more stuff? Fill us in, promote away.
Man, let me take a look. Easiest way to do it. I just typed in DX Ferris into Google and it gives you everything you need. So you don't have to go anywhere. Just go to Amazon, just type in DX Ferris on Google, and you're going to get a picture of me with Donnie Iris looking like the world's happiest gorilla. And links to buy all my stuff. I spend a fair amount of time on Instagram these days, at Slayer Books with an S. If you like Slayer, I have a podcast that is still sort of weekly, sort of when I'm making it, it's weekly. What I do with the podcast is it's every other chapter of the book for free listeners. And if you want to join Patreon, then you get all the chapters. So if you want to listen for free, you get half the stuff. And if you want to pay under $1 an episode, you can get every single one and you can listen to it. And you don't have to read this much stuff. So that's mostly what I do lately. I have a long-running comic strip that the pandemic killed very much the momentum on. I got busy doing other things, called Suburban Metal Dad. And it's not autobiographical, but my kids look at it and they recognize some things in it. It was always my intention to do 1,000 of those, 1,000, 100 a year, 10 years, wrap it up, bam. Then in 2020, it stalled out at about 923. So this year I'm making a push to, by any means necessary, just get those last 80 out there. And I've been doing that by just literally sketching them like in a notebook, in my, like a little pocket-sized notebook, and taking a picture and putting it on Instagram, and bam, that's the comic strip. No more computerized letters, no color, no nothing, but I got to get to 1,000. I just want to get that off my chest. The audio book of Slayer is going to be out sooner or later, hopefully by the holidays. I had it, the third version of it done, and then I doubled the space, or almost doubled the size of the book, and now I had to add in all this extra stuff, which it's much more difficult to add it into audio files as it is to just type it into a Word document. So Slayer audiobook going to be coming at you soon. Instagram, Slayer Books, random stuff every day, but the Slayer book, I think it's pretty good. As I said, there are 4 versions of it. The ebook has some color pictures. There's a short version of it. If you don't want to read all that stuff,
the Russian and Czech versions.
Yeah, and Russian and Czech. Those are, yeah. So I guess there are numerous versions of it. So there's a short version if you just want to get right to it. There's a 6x9 edition that has a full standalone biography, something like 39 pages of references. I try to be meticulous about that thing. Citations, research, presenting it so you can see where I got my facts from. And there's also a coffee size table of the book that, being that big, there's a page limit on the physically larger edition. But it's missing some things that most people wouldn't mind. So Slayer, they're back. They're coming back next year, 2026. They already announced to do shows. Slayer is happening in the present tense. What do we know? What do we not know? It's all there in the book. The previous version of the book was 350 pages, and it had 450 endnotes, research citations, that kind of thing. New version of the book, 639 pages. It has 795 endnotes, research citations, that kind of thing. So it's bigger, better. Previous version had 30, 35 images. The new one has like 70 images and pictures. So it's something that I really killed myself putting together, and not until the book felt that I was done with it would it let me be done with it.
Well, I have one more question for you, because you've been so generous with your time. And you are a big fan of Christmas to a Mick Foley-like level, maybe even more than Mick Foley. And I'm curious, about that. People who follow you online maybe know about mixes that you make each year for Christmas. Is there a Christmas 2025 mix coming from DX Ferris this year?
Yeah, I've been sweating that. There's going to be a DXmas 2020-25 mix. I have a few options. I'm trying to think of the shortest way to tell the story. Yeah, the shortest way is yes. There's going to be a Christmas mix this year. I got to wrap up a couple projects and put it together quickly. I have a few different Christmas mixes lying around in various states of assembly, but I want to make sure I'm giving all my friends the best possible Christmas experience. So I don't want it to be too arcane, too esoteric. I want to give a good Christmas artifact that everybody can enjoy, or everybody can enjoy, regardless of denomination. Because Christmas, I think, is it's about something bigger than like the traditional Christian Christmas experience. I think it's a time of magic. If you look at the actual historical birth date of Jesus, not around December, the people in charge of whatever church at the time, they had to move it to accommodate the holidays and the celebrations of my people, the Celtic people, so they could get something a little bit more element and cool and try to co-opt our stuff. I suppose they succeeded to a degree, but so when I say that I like Christmas, I like the elemental brotherhood of man, sisterhood of man. I like the lights. I like the symbolism of light and hope in the darkness. I like Christmas.
The light, the hope, and the darkness, hence the interest in Slayer, hence the interest in Goodfellas, hence the interest in professional wrestling. Complex things that you take for more than just the face entertainment value of the whole thing. And hence why I've been speaking with such a great author, podcaster, and comic artist. Are we done on the compliments?
Yeah, I'll take them.
Okay.
Darren, we contain multitudes, is it black? Is it white? Yes.
In the words of Daily Roth, nothing but yeah. Well,
hey, listen, man, thank you for being in my life. Thank you for collaborating with me. Thank you for doing it under such unusual circumstances. And I know that we don't talk and hang out as much as we should, but that is what life is like. You spend all your time with the wrong people. I appreciate you being on this planet. As far as I can tell, your wife is a worthy partner, so I know that all the right people appreciate you. But I appreciate you too, even if we've never pressed the flesh and necessarily seen each other at a DDP Christmas party. Maybe one year. I would like that.
Maybe
and
one
all
year.
Your listeners should know that that's the kind of guy they're listening to. You're good people.
Likewise. And to anybody still watching, still listening, etc., thank you for being you. We'll see you on a new thing very soon, and we will be linking DX's material in the copy. Thanks,
everybody. Thank you for caring. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Check the books out or do not, but tune into Darren's stuff. He does good work.
And